the complete list of my company cars, this time on Talking Vehicles with Joe. Now, if you watched the last video, it was really long. This one's not going to be anywhere near that long because I didn't have as many company cars. Here is the complete list of my company cars. I'll run down through that, tell you some interesting stories about those. My first company car that I ever received was a 1977 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Now, this was in 1979, and the Cutlass had been the previous salesperson's car, already had over 70,000 miles on it. And I don't think it was cared for the best that it could have been. I know it had a rebuilt engine, and the engine needed to be rebuilt somewhere along the line. And it had some problems. So that car didn't last very long. And my boss bought me a 1979 Ford Granada. And I think in previous video, I told you about how that Granada, it only had 300 miles on it, developed an engine problem because the engine wasn't manufactured properly and it had to get a new engine in it. Fortunately, the new engine worked well. A story I did not tell you about that Granada happened when I was traveling. I went to Erie, Pennsylvania in the wintertime. And I was in Erie, and I had gotten there and I was staying overnight because I had an early morning appointment the next morning. I checked into my hotel, did some work and some things that I needed to do, and it was time to go to bed. So I flipped the TV on, the news came on, I watched the weather, and they said that there was a storm coming into Erie. And the storm would drop down 2 to 4 inches, snowstorm would drop down 2 to 4 inches. But in Erie, that's nothing. They handle that like it's not like nothing, man. They've got the infrastructure to keep the city rolling when that happens. So I didn't think too much of it. Went to bed, woke up the next morning at 5:30 in the morning. I heard tires spinning out in the parking lot of the hotel. My room was on the ground floor. And so I go over to the window, kind of peek out, and the car that was parked right outside of my window was stuck in the parking lot. There was at least 6 or 7 inches of snow on the ground. It was coming down like a blizzard, almost like a whiteout. And a plow had gone through the parking lot and plowed the aisles in the parking lot. But of course, it pushed piles of snow up behind the car, and this car couldn't get through the piles of snow. So I flipped the television on, watched some early news, and they said, yeah, the system that had come through stalled over top of Erie, had put down about 6 or 7 inches, and was expected to put down at least another 3 more. And the mayor had asked people to not drive on the streets until they could get the streets cleared off. So I thought, well, I don't want to be around. Who knows how long that'll be? I don't want to just sit here and cool my heels. I'm going to get out of here and head south. Normally when a storm went through Erie, it didn't make it all the way south towards Pittsburgh. So I thought I'm going to head back towards Pittsburgh and, figure something else to do. So eat breakfast, get my car dug out, get the car out, and it's coming down so hard that I had cleaned my windows off, but by the time I got out of the parking lot, they were all covered again. So I get on the interstate, headed south to Pittsburgh, and visibility is really poor. But I catch up to an 18-wheel truck, and I can see the taillights in front of me. And so I'm driving along and running with this truck. We're going about 30 miles an hour. And pretty soon we kind of pull to the right a little bit and come to a stop. And we're just sitting there and sitting and sitting and sitting. And I'm thinking, wonder what's going on. I wonder if there was an accident up ahead or something, something happened. And I'm just about ready to get out of my car and go up and see if I can see what happened when there's a knock on my driver's window. And I put the window down and there's a guy standing there. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm fine. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm the truck driver in front of you." And I said, "Oh, I was just going to take a walk up there and see if I could see what was going on. What's happening?" And he said, "Nothing." I said, "Nothing. Why are we stopped?" He said, "Because we're in a rest area. I had to go to the bathroom." And so I kind of laughed, and he said, "You got to go to the bathroom?" And I said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I could." And he said, "Well, hurry up. I'll wait for you." So I ran in, went to the bathroom, came back out, and we took off. And we went further south. We got south of Meadville. The snow started letting up. And so I always appreciated that guy for waiting for me and kind of being my front door, getting me through that snowstorm. And the one other story I think I may have told about the Granada was the time the throttle spring broke. I was pulling into a parking lot, cutting across traffic. I had to step on the gas hard. And when I did that, the throttle spring broke. And I had a manager from one of the companies I represented in the front passenger seat. And we fly into the parking lot, and I let off the gas, and we don't slow down. And the guy's looking at me like, "Are you crazy?" And I hit the brakes, get the car under control, pull into a parking space, had the car in neutral, coasted into a parking space, shut the key off, and the car sat there and literally dieseled for like 15, 20 seconds or longer because the throttle was open. And so I got out, popped the hood up, saw the broken spring, went into an auto parts store. I sold auto parts, so we were going to an auto parts store. I went in an auto parts store, got a heavier gauge spring than what had been on there, put it on, and it was fine. But that manager would not ride with me. He called my boss, the owner of the rep agency, and made him come out and pick him up. He said, "I'm not riding in that car anymore." So that's the story about the Granada. The next car that I had, company car I had, was a Chevy Citation. That car had the chronic problem that the early X bodies had. When you hit the brakes, it liked to lock up. And I discovered that I was going down a hill in a town. The speed limit was like 35 miles an hour. It had rained. The hill was concrete, but it was worn concrete, so it was slick anyway. And I stepped on the brakes, and the car literally swapped ends. I was suddenly looking in the direction that I had come, but I was still going about 30 miles an hour backwards. And I could see the look on the face of the people in front of me that, it was like, whoa. And so fortunately, I got the car to a stop, got it turned around, and I got it going. But that's one thing I really remember about that car. My next car was a Volkswagen Rabbit diesel, and I think I told the story about the time we sold glow sticks, and we were at a customer convention in Baltimore. And on the way home, I broke open a bunch of them, like about a dozen of them, threw them in the back, and made the car glow green in the back. And when I stopped at a rest stop, somebody came up to me and said, "What's going on with that car?" And I told them, "Oh, it's actually got a nuclear generator to help generate electricity to power some electric motors to give it more power. And there must be something wrong with them." And the guy freaked out, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to blow up. You got it away from this radiation, the whole thing." Remember, this was not shortly after 3 Mile Island had happened in Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. And so I finally told the guy what was really going on, gave him some glow sticks, and we got a good laugh. Next car was a 79 Cadillac Sedan DeVille that had been my boss's. It was a hand-me-down. Loved that car. I had it for about maybe 5 months, and they had to pry my fingers off of it. Even though it had over 100,000 miles, it was still a really nice car. That was replaced with a Dodge Aries K car, and very kind of a somewhat plain one. Had air and had an AM/FM stereo radio and power steering and brakes. That was about it. But that was the one where the throttle cable attached to the throttle pedal came through the firewall and attached to the throttle pedal, and it was a very inexpensive arrangement that failed. And so the throttle pedal would become detached from the throttle cable at inopportune times. And again, one time I had a manager from one of the companies I sold, different company, but one of the companies that I sold for, with me in the car. We were on a highway, we were sitting in traffic, and the throttle pedal became disconnected. And I told him what happened, and I told him what the setup was. And he said, "Well, I'll see if I can get under there and reconnect it." Oh, he couldn't get it reconnected, but he stayed under there and operated the throttle cable. And I would yell down to him, a little more, back off. And he would give me a little more throttle or back off till we could get over to off the side of the road, pull over somewhere safe, and we could get underneath there and get it reconnected. So I'll never forget that guy underneath my dash pulling the throttle cable and me telling him, a little more, a little less. I switched jobs and got a 1984 Mercury Marquis Brougham company car. Before I got the Marquis Brougham, I had a 1981 Olds 98 Regency Brougham that had been another salesman's car. And this one was well taken care of, and it was a beautiful car. Reminded me a lot of the 79 Cadillac Ride and Drive. And I loved that car, but I only had it for about 2 weeks. It had a lot of miles on it, and they didn't want it out on the road racking up more miles. That's when I got my 84 Mercury Marquis Brougham. Funny thing that happened with that car was I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I was driving back home across the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It was a Friday. And when I got to around Breezewood, I was up on a mountain and I could start pulling in Pittsburgh radio stations. And they were all talking about the whiteout that had gone through Pittsburgh. There was a sudden, storm that blew through, and it was a whiteout for a while. And I thought, oh man, I hope that I don't run into that on the way home. I hope, either it lessens or I can get to where I live before it hits. Well, I didn't. I drove along and I came around a bend, and all of a sudden there was just a wall of white. And I had the cruise control on. I was driving along. I kicked the cruise control off and thought, I better slow down. I can't see anything. So I stepped on the brakes and the car went straight sideways. And I slid along sideways for a little bit, finally came to a stop and sat there for a while until this whiteout cleared. I put the passenger window down to clear it to see if I could see, because I knew, the way the car had gone sideways, the passenger window was moving forward the way I wanted to go. I wanted to see what was in the path ahead of me. When I put the window down, there was a car next to me, not a foot from my car. And had I slid just a little bit more, I would have hit that car. So thankfully I didn't. Got out, got my cars clear, got all my windows cleared off, and that car got himself all cleared off, and the car in front of him got all cleared off, and we were able to clear the path and get going. I believe there were some accidents behind me, but that's one of the things I remember with that car. I got another job after that. That gave me a company car. It was a 1986 Ford Taurus LX. That had been my boss's car. I replaced my boss. He got promoted. I replaced him in the region, and it was a nice car. LX fully loaded. Developed an engine problem about 90,000 miles. My 1988 Ford Tempo GLS, which replaced the Taurus. I got that car in about 1990, I believe. And it had been a car that the company used to do as a test mule. They made automotive products for engines, and they used that car for a test mule, but it only had like 15,000 miles on it. So it was relatively nice. It was the GLS model, which was the sport model. So it had nicer seats in it, but it was still a Tempo. I wasn't all that excited about it. But one of the funny things that happened with that car, when I picked it up in St. Louis, which is where the company headquarters were, it was winter. And a real cold snap had come through. And I mean, it was cold. The temperature during the day was single digits. And during night, it was getting below zero, double digits below zero. And I left St. Louis, and it was later in the afternoon, and I'd made it to like Effingham, Illinois, and got a hotel. So I go into the hotel, spend the night there, come out the next morning, it's 15 below zero. I mean, bitterly cold. So I get over to the Tempo, get in the car. And by the way, the Tempo had those passive seatbelt systems where the shoulder belt was attached to a bracket that would be like right over here on your shoulder on the B pillar. And the bracket was motorized. When you opened the car door or shut the car off, the bracket would travel on a track up over the threshold of the door and partway down the A pillar. So your shoulder belt was laying like that, and you were to snake out underneath it. You still had to attach the lap belt, but the shoulder belt was passive. It would automatically do that. So when I parked the car that night, the shoulder belt went over there and stopped. I get in the car in the morning, and it's like 15 below zero, and I turn the key, and I'm telling you, I've never heard a starter turn an engine slower than I heard that morning in that car. It was and I thought, this car is not going to start, but it started. The oil light stayed on for a good 5 seconds. I mean, I was just reaching for the key to shut the engine off because I thought I'm going to damage the engine. But as I was doing that, the oil light went out. Okay, thank goodness. So the car sat there and ran. And I let it run for about 3 or 4 minutes. and the temperature gauge didn't move. And I thought, okay, well, I need to drive this to start to get the temperature gauge to move and get some heat out of it. Put it into gear, and it was that point that I noticed that my shoulder belt was still over there on the A-pillar, just sitting there, and it was frozen there. It wouldn't move. I tried to pull it. It wouldn't move. So I thought, well, I got to get rolling, man. I need to get home. So I drove the car with the shoulder belt like that for probably a good half hour, because it took at least 15 minutes to start getting any significant heat out of the heater. And the interior of the car started to warm up, and I'm driving along, and I hear the shoulder belt, the little motor that ran it, try to operate it, and it moved a little bit, came a little bit up, and every once in a while it would come a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And when it got about halfway across, then it went all the way down. But I just remember that shoulder belt being stuck there and just how annoying it was. The final company car is my 2001 Ford Explorer XLT. Something interesting that happened in that car was I was out with one of my customers who distributed auto parts, visiting their customers. And we went to a service shop, and the shop was very busy. His parking lot was full. And he said, I'll just park in front of their garage door. Now, the garage door was where cars went in and out for service. And it's a no-no. You don't park in front. You don't block those doors. That's for customers, and they want to keep the flow of traffic going. He said, but the guy said to me, yeah, we're only going to be in there a few minutes, and it'll be okay. So we parked there. We went in and we talked to the owner of the shop. I probably spent a little more than a few minutes. Probably spent more like 15 or 20 minutes there. And I came back out to leave, and I got in my Explorer, and I tried to turn the ignition key, and it wouldn't move. I mean, it was jammed tight. So I told the guy that I was with, I said, man, this key will not move. And he tried, he couldn't get it to move. We tugged on the steering wheel, we tugged on the gear lever, couldn't get it to move. I called Ford, the Ford helpline. They said, tug on the steering wheel, tug on the gear lever. We did it again. It still wouldn't work. They said, okay, we'll get somebody out there to tow you. So I said, how long is that going to be? And they said, probably it'll be about a half hour before they can get there. Well, the guy that owned the shop said, hey, man, I'm finishing up with this car. And if your car isn't out of the way, I've got a forklift. I'm moving it. And I said, I totally understand that. So fortunately, the tow vehicle arrived like 2 minutes before the guy was going to go get his forklift. The customer that owned the vehicle that was being serviced inside was there paying for it. And I mean, it was like, it has to be done now. But something happened to the key lock assembly in the steering column that caused it to lock up and it wouldn't move. And it was, they were able to repair it. The dealer repaired it and everything was fine. So those are some of my recollections and stories about my company cars. This video is a little bit long, just like the last one was. I apologize for it being so long. I hope you enjoyed these stories about my cars. And I'll talk to you again next time on Talking Vehicles with Joe.